When we speak about what truly begins to change after 35, we are not talking about age in the biological sense alone. We are talking about a psychological shift. For many narcissistic women, the early years were defined by effortless validation. Attention arrived without intention. Approval was abundant, and identity became quietly dependent on being reflected back by others. This is not confidence, it is reinforcement. And reinforcement, when uninterrupted, creates dependency. Over time, however, the external mirrors begin to dim. The world does not respond with the same immediacy, the same fascination, the same tolerance. This moment often arrives without warning. It is not announced. It is felt. Conversations change. Invitations slow. The emotional leverage that once existed no longer functions as it did before. And in that silence, something unsettling emerges, the realization that admiration was never guaranteed, only temporary. Carl Jung observed that what we refuse to develop inwardly will eventually confront us outwardly as fate. When validation fades, the narcissistic structure has little to replace it. There is no internal anchor, no cultivated self, only the hunger to be seen again. This is why anxiety replaces arrogance, and urgency replaces selectiveness. What once felt like abundance begins to feel like loss. At this stage, many mistake this discomfort for readiness. They believe they have matured, when in truth they are simply reacting to deprivation. The desire for commitment, stability, or meaning is not born from insight, but from the fear of becoming invisible. And fear, while powerful, is a poor foundation for transformation. Here is the truth worth sitting with. When identity is built on applause, silence becomes unbearable. But when identity is built on substance, silence becomes peace. And that difference determines not just relationships, but destiny. When the phrase "I'm ready now" appears, it often sounds like growth. It sounds reasonable, even admirable. But psychologically, we must ask a deeper question: ready for what, and why now? In many cases, this declaration does not emerge from reflection or inner work, but from a sudden awareness that time has narrowed the field. What was once postponed without consequence can no longer be delayed without cost. In life, choice felt endless. Commitment could be avoided because attention was always renewable. There was no urgency to build, only the freedom to select. But as options diminish, desire quietly transforms. What was once dismissed becomes suddenly valuable. Stability, once seen as confinement, is now reframed as meaning. This shift feels like wisdom, but it is often necessity wearing the mask of maturity. Jung spoke of the danger of confusing adaptation with individuation. Adaptation is reacting to circumstance. Individuation is becoming whole. The "I'm ready now" phase is usually adaptation. It is the psyche responding to external pressure, not internal alignment. The narcissistic structure does not suddenly learn empathy or accountability. It simply seeks a new source of security as the old sources weaken. This is why the readiness feels rushed. There is impatience, subtle desperation, and an insistence on being chosen quickly. The language becomes softer, the promises broader, but the core remains unchanged. Without self-examination, readiness becomes a strategy, not a transformation. For the listener, the lesson is not about judging another's timing, but about recognizing motive. True readiness is quiet. It does not announce itself. It is patient, grounded, and willing to be seen without performance. If urgency is leading the way, wisdom is not behind it. It is being outrun. Another quiet shift that occurs after this stage is the erosion of control. Narcissistic influence depends on asymmetry, one person needing, chasing, or idealizing more than the other. In earlier years, this imbalance is easy to create. Inexperience, emotional hunger, and idealism make people vulnerable to charm and ambiguity. But time changes the audience. After 35, many potential partners have already learned the cost of emotional games. They recognize patterns more quickly, ask clearer questions, and walk away sooner. This creates a deep frustration within the narcissistic psyche. The tactics that once worked, withdrawal, hot and cold behavior, subtle guilt, no longer produce the same results. Instead of pursuit, they are met with boundaries. Instead of confusion, they encounter clarity. And clarity is threatening to a personality built on control through uncertainty. Jung understood that power loses its grip the moment it is seen. Once manipulation is recognized, it collapses. What follows is often not humility, but escalation. The narcissistic woman may attempt to reassert dominance through urgency, emotional intensity, or manufactured crises. Yet each attempt only reveals the strategy more clearly, further weakening its effect. This is the paradox of this phase. The more control is sought, the less it is received. As relational leverage fades, the narcissist experiences a loss not just of influence, but of identity. Control was never about the other person. It was about avoiding inner emptiness. Without it, there is nothing to hide behind. For the listener, this moment offers clarity. Healthy relationships are not built on imbalance or confusion. They are built on mutual presence and choice. When someone needs control to feel secure, they are not ready for connection. They are defending against themselves. Recognize that, and you reclaim your power without ever raising your voice. As control weakens and the future feels less certain, the psyche often turns backward. This is where the return to past connections begins. Old partners reappear in memory not because they were understood more deeply, but because they are familiar. Familiarity offers comfort without requiring growth. It allows the narcissistic woman to revisit a time when admiration was easier to obtain and roles were already established. Jung described this pull as regression, the psyche retreating to an earlier stage when the ego felt safer. In this phase, messages arrive wrapped in nostalgia. The tone is warm, reflective, sometimes even apologetic. But this is rarely about accountability. It is about restoring a dynamic where power once existed. The past becomes a refuge, not a lesson. What makes this return deceptive is its emotional subtlety. It does not arrive as overt manipulation. It comes as curiosity, concern, or a sudden desire to check in. Yet beneath it lies the same unresolved structure. Without inner change, revisiting the past simply reactivates old patterns with older players. For those on the receiving end, this moment is often confusing. Time has softened memories. Distance has blurred pain. The invitation feels meaningful, even fated. But meaning is not measured by familiarity. Growth requires movement forward, not repetition. Jung warned that what is not made conscious will be lived out repeatedly. When the past returns, it is not asking to be relived, it is asking to be understood. The question is whether one uses the moment for clarity or for comfort. Here is the insight worth holding. Closure does not come from reopening doors. It comes from recognizing why they were closed in the first place. You choose understanding over nostalgia. You break the cycle, and in doing so, you reclaim the future. Beneath the appearance of confidence, another reality quietly takes shape: loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the deeper kind that comes from never being truly known. Narcissistic personalities are often surrounded by people, yet internally isolated. Their relationships orbit around performance, admiration, and control, not mutual vulnerability. Over time, this creates a social world that looks full but feels hollow. After 35, this emptiness becomes harder to ignore. Friendships thin out. Social circles change. The constant exchange of validation slows, and without it, silence begins to speak. Jung understood that when the persona, the mask we present to the world, dominates the personality, the true self retreats into the shadows. The more the mask is maintained, the more disconnected one becomes from authentic connection. At this stage, the narcissistic woman may still appear self-assured, even desirable, but the confidence is increasingly defensive. It must be maintained rather than lived. There is less joy in attention and more anxiety about losing it. Conversations feel transactional, relationships feel conditional, and in the quiet moments, there is a sense that something essential is missing, though it cannot easily be named. This loneliness is not punishment, it is information. It signals that the strategy of self-worth through RNAL affirmation has reached its limit. The psyche is asking for depth, not applause, yet without the courage to turn inward, the emptiness is often projected outward, blaming others for distance, coldness, or lack of loyalty. For the listener, this offers an important distinction. Real confidence does not fear solitude. It can sit with silence without needing to fill it. When someone cannot be alone with themselves, no amount of admiration will ever be enough. And when you learn to recognize that, you stop mistaking charisma for connection and start choosing relationships that can actually sustain. Eventually, everything converges into a single confrontation. Time, not as an enemy, but as a mirror that cannot be flattered. By the mid to late 30s, the strategies that once protected the narcissistic self begin to fail. Roles no longer fit, the rewards diminish, and the psyche is left with a choice it has avoided for years: evolve or harden. Jung believed that the second half of life demands a turning inward. What worked in youth, he argued, will not serve us later. For the narcissistic woman, this moment is especially stark. Without reflection, the personality structure calcifies. Defensiveness becomes bitterness. Charm becomes resentment. Blame replaces curiosity. The world is experienced as unfair rather than instructive. Yet this stage also holds the only real possibility for transformation. When the external sources of validation dry up, the psyche is forced to ask different questions. Who am I without attention? What do I offer beyond attraction? What have I avoided feeling? These are uncomfortable inquiries, and many retreat from them. But those who stay with the discomfort begin to change in ways no performance ever could. This is where narcissism, if it is to dissolve, does so quietly, not through grand apologies or sudden enlightenment, but through sustained self-examination. The false self loses its grip when the individual becomes willing to see their own shadow without fleeing. And in that process, something unexpected emerges: humility, depth, and the capacity for genuine connection. For the listener, this final insight is liberating. You cannot save someone from this reckoning, nor should you try. Growth is a solitary responsibility. What you can do is choose not to confuse potential with reality. Time reveals truth to everyone. The question is not what happens to them, but what you choose to do once you see it.